With us today as we celebrate the work of Miraku Kamei, 15th generation artist, and his son Hisaaki. What a wonderful opportunity again for us to come together with them, even though it is virtually, and begin and continue actually to explore their work over the past 2 years, surrounded by and underwritten by, so to speak, the pandemic. Many of you, I'm sure, have been impacted during these past 2 years. And so to have their artistic and human response to it is very, very meaningful and very important. We're thrilled again to have Professor Andrew Maskey with us, now at Wayne State University in Detroit, both teaching in their assumed Japanese and art department, and also directing a museum certificate program, which should be a wonderful opportunity both for the students and for him to address the opportunities that are available now for people who go into museum studies works. Mugi is with us under some duress with some COVID, and hence the virtual opportunity is possible, because we certainly couldn't be in the same room with her and be safe. Thank you. Andrew, if you wouldn't mind just giving a brief introduction, possibly to your long-standing relationship with Takatori ware and your present relationship to the works of Miraku Kamei and his son.
I was first introduced to Takatori ware when I was an exchange student in Fukuoka, Japan in 1984-85. And I happened to have an apartment as a student at Seinan Gakuin University, which was only about a quarter of a mile, maybe a third of a mile from the Kamei kiln. So I became aware of their work quite early. And over the subsequent years that I lived in Japan, I really fell in love with Japanese ceramics, and particularly the wares of the island of Kyushu, where Fukuoka is located. And eventually, I decided that I wanted to become an art historian focusing on ceramics. And I wrote my doctoral dissertation at Oxford University on Takatori ware, making use of both historical documents and the archaeological excavations that were taking place in the historical kiln sites that had produced Takatori ware since the early 1600s. So I do have a long and relatively deep background looking at Takatori ware. And also my longest connection is in fact with the Kamei family, where I got to know Kamei Miraku XIV, the father of the current head. So it's a tremendous pleasure to be able to talk about their work and ask them questions about their fabulous pieces.
Reflect, Andrew, on the fact that that is 38 years ago, which is probably before Hisaaki was born. It ages one of us or another of us, but I'd like very much for Miraku Kamei to speak to us just briefly about what it means from his perspective to have a scholar like yourself with such a profound interest in the entire tradition of his family, and especially in his work and in his son's work.
高取焼きって、九州一円で見ればすごい有名な、いわゆるメジャーな窯元っていうのは結構あるんですけど、高取焼きってどっちかっていうとマイナーな部類に入るんですよ。というのが、やはりお茶道具を専門に作る窯元ということで、 茶の湯をたしなんでる茶人の方にとってみれば、すごく、ブランドで言えば、ルイ・ヴィトンとか、ちょっと言い過ぎかもしれないですけど、そのくらいやっぱりブランド的な焼き場なんですけども、お茶を知らない方にとっては、全くなんだっていうイメージなんですよね。だから逆に高取焼きのいわゆるから派生した窯元の小石原焼きっていうのがあるんですけども、こちらはいわゆる民需用の食器なんかを、ね、多く作ってる窯元なんで、非常に認知度としては高取焼きよりも高いと。だからそういうねちょっとマイナーな窯元に対してすごくだから研究熱心っていうのかな、魅力を持ってくださって研究していただいたことに対してはすごく私自身も喜びでいっぱいでございます。もうどんどんもっと高取焼きのそういったいい部分をもっともっとこう学者さんっていうのがやっぱり有識者の方がどんどんやっぱり伝えていっていただきたいと私はもう常々思っております。というのがやっぱり作家自身がやっぱりそれを言っちゃうと私の作品いいでしょいいでしょっていうことになってしまうんで、やっぱりちょっとこう距離を置いたそういう第三者的な研究家の方がやっぱり支持してくださるっていうのは非常にありがたいことですね。だからもうマスキーさんにとって私すごく感謝しております。
So, in Kyushu area, Takatori in Kyushu Islands, there are so many different major kiln, major pottery places, and Takatori is not really a major kiln. It's more probably minor. If you are doing deep relationship with Chanoyu, which is a tea ceremony, then Takatori probably is a brand, has a brand a power, like Louis Vuitton, for example, like, for regular people. So for people who knows about who know about tea or tea ceremony, it's a huge deal. But for people who do not have anything to do with tea, then it's Takatori is like, what is it? Like there are other major places. So like Takatori is not well known. So he, Mr. Kamei really think that professor like Andrew really get into this Takatori and dig into this in sort of academic way is very amazing, and then it's very appreciative because Mr. Kamei wants people to know about Takatori, but he himself cannot, because he's an artist and he is the maker, so he cannot say, well, look at my pieces, it's great. You can't say that. So if somebody like Andrew, professor or scholars could actually evaluate it and appreciate our work, that would be much, much better for us. And then we always appreciate his interest and love to Takatori.
Andrew, I think it's appropriate for you at least to have a response to that. I totally agree with you, Mugi, and I'm going to ask a question when Andrew's through about the range of work that they have created for our exhibition. But Andrew, would you like to respond just slightly?
Sure, just briefly. One of the things that was so interesting to me as a researcher of historical ceramics was the amount of information about Takatori ware that survives, which is much greater than that for many of the more famous ceramic types. For example, there's another ceramic type called Karatsu ware on Kyushu that is has been famous for 400 years plus. But about the early origins of that type, very little is known. People are still trying to figure out how it started, where it started, who started it, and that sort of thing, because there's really no solid documentation about that. In contrast, there's a lot of documentation about Takatori ware, and the production sites where it was made throughout its history have all been investigated. And I was able to participate in some of those investigations and look at the pieces that were found. So Takatori ware is, as you will see, a beautiful ceramic type. It's very vibrant, though considered sort of a minor type today. But it also has this wonderful history and beautiful pieces that have been handed down through the generations. And in fact, in terms of historical ceramics, is now beginning to become considered a major type because of excavations that have shown Takatori wares were shipped to the capital of Kyoto in the early 17th century. They've been found at the sites of tea ceramic merchants at that time. So in the 17th century, Takatori ware was a major ceramic type. And we're just fortunate that it continues today through the work of artists like Kamei Miraku XV and his son Kamei Hisaaki.
Wonderful way for us to start looking at some art. So let's look at the first chawan. The image on the screen, as you can see, is a mizusashi. And if Miraku, you would be willing to talk just a bit about its creation, I would appreciate it.
この水差しについてちょっとそのどういうふうにお作りになったかということを含めてちょっとお話しいただければありがたいんですけれども。
水差しっていうのは高取焼きを代表する、アイテムの、一つなんですけども、やっぱり私で15代になりますけども、私の前には14人先人たちがいるわけです。で、彼の久明の前には私を含めて15人。だから代が増えれば、それだけ先人たちも増えていくわけですよね。で、やっぱりね、昔は御用窯っていうことであったんで、その個人の作家の好みっていうのはなかなか反映するのが難しかった。どちらかっていうと、藩主とか、それを支えていく茶人ですね。これが古田織部であり、小堀遠州であり、そういう人の好みが反映されて、一つの形となったものが世に出回ったわけなんですけども、廃藩置県以降はやっぱりその個人の造形がやっぱ問われる時代になってきまして、この本当小さなものの中に、特にお茶入れもそうなんですけども、後ろにたくさんね並んでますけど、その小さなものの中にやっぱりその15代という人間をどんなふうにはめ込んでいくかっていうね、これは14代の父も言ってましたけども、なかなか難しいことです。本当に小さなものなんで、そこで、後でさっきも言うと思いますけども、やっぱり先人たちがやってきたもう一通りのやっぱり仕事をこなすこと、それがまず一つの条件になります。だからそれがバックボーンになって初めてこの15代の作品に変わってくるわけなんですけども、やっぱり温故知新っていう言葉が日本ではあるんですけども、古きを訪ねて新しきを知るっていう、だからやっぱりその本当にマスキーさんなんかが研究されてるそういう古いものっていうのをやっぱり見て研究しながら 自分の作品につなげていくっていう、これはもう本当に並大抵なことではないんですけども、で、まあ、今画面に出てる作品もこれもパッと見は多分高取焼きっていうのがすぐお分かりになると思います。だからそういう高取焼きの良さっていうものは何なのかっていうのをまずちゃんと知った上で自分の造形で作っていく。で今回はまあゼンスプリットっていうことで、禅の世界をまあ、作品の中に取り込んで、作ったわけですけども、まあ、基本的に丸、それから三角、四角っていうのが一つのテーマになってくるんですけどもね。
So if you look at this Mizusashi the water container, that's one of the very representative of Takatori Yaki. And so I am the 15th. So that means like before me will be 14 people existed. And for my son, Hisaaki, will be 15 people existed. So the more the generation goes down, there are more people that you have to learn from the previous ones. So that before that, the everything, the personal artist, personal taste or artist, personal technology or their way of looking at pottery could not be reflected into a pieces, because basically our ancestors made potteries for our feudal lord or famous tea masters like Furita Oribe or Kobori Enshu. We are not making it for us. We were making for our client basically. So nobody is talking about artist individual preference or individual taste. But after the revolution, now after that, the individual artist sort of is focused, and then now individual artist has to create their pieces with their own, like his own taste and his own philosophy. So that it's such a tiny little piece, but in this piece, you can really see the 15th or 14 people behind us, those traditions and their characters are included in there. So we have to, the basic thing is that we have to learn all the techniques that our ancestors developed first. And then after that, we finally try to think of our own personal technology or personal preferences. But we have to learn from the history first. We have to master our technology, our technique or our history first. And then on top of it, we have our own individual preference or taste. So that is, it is a very difficult thing to master all the technologies, techniques, and basic things that they developed beforehand. But so for example, if you look at this piece, like everybody knows that it's Takatori ware, just to look at it. That is because we mastered all the techniques that our ancestors developed. So we could not eliminate all those histories, and then we have to have a history inside this tiny piece, and my own taste and my own way of thinking has to be in there too. So this time our show is focusing on Zen Spirit, Zen philosophy. That is, the theme is square, a circle and a triangle and square. Those three shapes are the Zen Spirit, and then our pieces have reflected on those three shapes.
And Andrew, would you comment on that perception that it is his responsibility to really integrate the techniques and approaches of the first 14 generations, and then once that has happened, to find an expression that he himself can add to that tradition?
Sure. One of the interesting things about Takatori ware is that the techniques have been handed down from generation to generation, and that's part of the reason that it has remained rather minor, because these special techniques have been closely kept as basically a closely guarded secret. So it's been difficult to for others to sort of, start doing that style, particularly in things like the glazes. There are glaze recipes that survive from the 18th or 19th century, but they're only lists of the materials. They're not details about how much of a particular quantity of a certain material was used in formulating the glaze. So the potters themselves know this and hand that information down to each other. But that very tradition, as Kamei Miraku-san has said in the past, it's both a benefit because you have that information, but it's also makes it difficult for them to innovate, because they have to worry about, am I staying true to this tradition that 14 people or 15 people before me have carried on? You simply can't say, oh, I'm just going to do whatever I want as an artist. You have to remain true to that.
その亀井様がおっしゃられたことに対する、教授のコメントなんですけれども、高取焼きがマイナーでとおっしゃってますが、それがなぜそういうふうにずっとなっていたかっていうのは、結局その技法っていうのが、高取焼きの特別な技法というのがその代々受け継がれてきて、それは秘密というんでしょうか、かなりその皆さんにオープンにしていたわけではないので、それがマイナーであるという、その規模が大きくならない、一つの理由であったということなんですけれども、例えば釉薬にしても18世紀19世紀の方からずっと受け継がれてきて、それでそれが一つは陶芸家の方に、今の現代の陶芸家の方にとっては、いいことでもあり悪いことでもあると。いいことっていうのはその情報が多いというのと、その伝統的な技法というのが受け継がれてきているからなんですけれども、亀井様もおっしゃったように、ではその悪い点というか、それはこの上でどうやってその革新的な作品を作っていくのか、これから好きなこと、じゃあ自分がやりたいことをそのままやればいいんじゃないかということはお考えになるかもしれませんが、そういうことではなく、なぜなら自分はこれで伝統にのっとっているか、今まで先人が築き上げてきたその伝統を壊さないでそのまま受け継がれているかということを常に自問自答しなければいけないということで、そこが非常に難しい、現代の陶芸家にとっては非常に難しいところではないかということです。
おっしゃる通りですね。
That's exactly what Professor says. That's exactly, it's a hard thing to do.
So we had established an order of some of the images that we wanted to look at today with you. My preference right now is to ask Carolyn to pull up the very last image first and share the question that Professor Maske had prepared as a continuation of both the discussion of respect and integration of tradition and innovation.
これ今見ていただいたんですけど、これからこの一番最後の作品からお見せしたいんですが、ここにはその伝統とそれから今の現在の革新的な、見方、革新的な陶芸というのが非常に融合されている作品ではないかと思います。
Yeah, so this tea bowl is really almost without precedent in the history of ceramics made for cha no yu. It may be a little bit difficult to tell here, but this is actually a two-layered tea bowl. So if you look inside the inner part of the bowl, it looks like any other bowl essentially. But on the outside, of course, you can see the beautiful open work pattern. So there are actually two layers to the walls of this tea bowl. And I don't know any other examples of a bowl like this in the history of, really in the history of Japanese ceramics, at least for ceramics that are made to be used. At the same time, it preserves all of the traditional aspects of Takatori ware, the fine clay, the beautiful variegated multicolored glaze, and the open work pattern also has historical precedents going all the way back to the early 17th century. And there are pieces with open work like this that have been preserved in museums in Japan and even in the United States. So I would like to ask 15th generation Kamei Miraku if he could describe what inspired him to make a tea bowl like this. It can't be something easy to make. And also if he would describe something like the process, the technical process of actually doing this. I'd appreciate that so much.
この今のちょっと長かったんですけど、質問の内容は先に一番に書いてある、こういう見たこともないような新しい作品をどうやってお作りになったのかということと、技法を少し教えていただければと思います。
もともと高取焼きっていうのはやっぱり薄い作りなもんですから、熱いお茶を入れるとやっぱり熱伝導の関係でちょっとあちちってなっちゃって、やっぱり、手に取った時に熱くて持てないっていうようなこともあったんですよね。でこれ二重にすれば熱伝導が非常に伝わりにくいっていうことで、結構熱いお茶が中に入っても持てるようになる。でもね、ちょっとそれは私もちょっとあまりそこまで考えてなかったんですけども、逆にそうやって持った時に熱が伝わるっていうことで中に入ってるお茶の熱さっていうのが分かるわけですよね。熱いのか冷たいのか。それがこのお茶碗はないもんですから、結構熱いお茶が入ってても手取りはそんなに熱くないんで、飲まれた時に熱いっていう感じになるんで、賛否両論だと思いますけども、でここのねやっぱり難しいところは中の見込みをですね、見込みってこの内側の部分になるんですけど、ここの深さをですね、深さをこうたっぷり深く取るっていうのが結構難しかったですね。やっぱり二重の作りになってますんで、やっぱり中の方が若干こう上に上がってくる。 それをなるべく下の方に抑えて、なるべく深く取るっていうことがちょっとこう、ちょっと難しかった。
So, originally Takatori were one of the characteristics of Takatori ware is very thinly made. It's very thin, so that if you pour a hot tea in there, it is very hard to hold it because it's thin, and then so you feel the heat. So that's why originally I thought about it is just to have double layer. Then when you hold it, then you can hold it even though there's a hot tea in there because there's a double layer. But I never thought of it, but before I made it, because even though the tea, it's inside it is hot, but if you hold it, you don't feel it. So when you drink it, actually, you unexpectedly feel that it's hot. So that's pros and cons. That like you can hold it, but you might not be able to sort of figure out how hot the tea inside is. So that's the pros and cons. But one of the difficult technical difficulties of this is just to have inside layer to make it deeper enough, because when it's not like you have to have deeper inside because there's two layers. If the inside is coming up and then not deep enough, then you can't hold any tea. So that was one of the difficulties for me to make it a deep first layer, inside layer.
I think Andrew's question, though, Mugi, is how, in fact, was he able to create the two layers, yet maintain the beautiful shape and form of the piece, also using the cutouts to create a relationship to the idea of shippo, of good luck, all of the parts of their tradition integrated into an innovation, if you will. I think that was also part of Andrew's question. And hopefully, Caroline, you can hold the tea bowl in front of the camera
absolutely.
And show the inside of it as well. It's really quite extraordinary.
Absolutely. Here's the inside of it. I'm not sure. Yeah.
And then sort of slightly to the side, beside the photograph, it's sort of nice to see the real piece as if you're holding it between both hands and sharing it.
そう、お茶が溶けやすいようになるべく深く、まあこの内側のことを見込みっていうんですけども、ここなるべくまあこう覗いたときにまあ宇宙が広がるように深く広く見せるっていうのがやっぱり難しかったですね。
One of the difficulties, as I said before, because you have to make tea, so you have to have certain depth, but at the same time, the certain space, sort of certain space required to make some tea. And when you look at inside, you hold your bowl and you look inside, you're supposed to feel the universe, the space, and that's where the universe is when you make tea. So in order to do that, you have to have certain space, the spacious feelings, and the depths. That was the hard thing to make this piece.
And then to create the secondary wall. How did you do that? And then join it at the top somehow so that it feels absolutely perfect.
それをお作りになって、その外側の次の外側の層をまた一緒にして、まあで非常に伝統的なまあ形のお茶碗を作りになったんですけど、それ一体どういうふうになさるんですかね。
作り方、
作り方と、あとどうしてそういうことを作ろうというふうにお考えになったんでしょう。
もうとにかく先人たちがやってないこと。だからもうこれは15代さんの作品だねと一目でわかる作品。だからさっきも申しましたけども、 まあ、ずーっと14代まで培ってきた技術はそのまま網羅しながら、カトリという分かるような感じで、まあ、これは15代の作品だよと一目で分かるような技法ってなんだろうなっていつもこれ模索しながら作ってるんですよ。まあその中で私こういうの見たことなかったんで、以前この広大の部分にこう尻尾を入れてましたよね。あれもなかった技法なんですよね。だからそれから発展して今度はまあ花入れとか壺とかにはね、こういう二重の作りで、尻尾を入れるっていうことをやってましたけども、まあこのお茶碗にやったらどうかなと思って作ってみたら、ああなるほど、ちょっと面白いんじゃないかっていうような、まあこれが以前の尻尾のあれですよね。これが発展系ですよね。だからね。ただやっぱり技術的に難しいです。
そうですか。
はい。今言ったように、
お茶碗の方が難しいってことですよね。
お茶の方が難しいです。実際やっぱりこう使う道具ですから、使う道具なんで、手取りもやっぱりそんなに重いと困りますし、だから普通のこういうお茶碗と遜色ないぐらいの軽さ、重さっていうんですかね。それでこの二重を作るっていうのは結構難しいですね。
So basically, this is what I have been always thinking about what my ancestors haven't done. So this is sort of I wanted to make some pieces that recognize as the 15th piece. If you look at it as, oh, this is the 15th creation. That's what I wanted to do, but I've been thinking about it. So as Professor said, I have not seen this before, those chawan with 2 layers. I have done it with the foot part. You have like open work and the foot part. And I did some with the vase and then the pot with the open work. But from that point of view, I sort of developed that idea into tea bowl because I thought it would be very interesting, but it's much harder than I thought because this is the actual pottery that people use. So people use it to make tea and then hold it. So you can't have like very heavy one because it tend to be heavy because it's double layered, but you have to have sort of the similar feelings when you hold it with not the double layer, the single layer one, because it's too heavy. It has a completely different feelings. So when you make it, even though double layers is sort of like have the lightness of one of the characteristics of Takatori, lightness, to keep the lightness, but with the double layer, that's much, much harder than I thought originally.
I just wanted then to share a quote of Brother Thomas's, and then we'll move on to the Zen pieces that he did in a moment. Brother Thomas wrote, "Skill and art are not the same thing. The only real measure of art is astonishment." And I would say that certainly having this 2-walled tea bowl is astonishing, certainly for me, and I think for Andrew as well.
Absolutely.
It is a prepared passage that I'm going to ask Carolyn to read about these 3 pieces, the square, the triangle, and the circle, and then ask if both Andrew and then Miraku would respond to it.
During the pandemic, Miraku Kamei XV had the space and time to concentrate on Zen practice, which requires discipline, dedication, motivation, and patience. It is cultivated through repetition and consistency. The goal is to focus and clarify the mind and let go of excess and roughness, like rocks in a tumbler becoming smoother and more refined. The process is analyzed as the basic forms of square, triangle, and a circle. From the square to the triangle, then the triangle to the circle, corners and edges gradually disappear, like a person devoting themselves to self-improvement. Miraku Kamei XV honors this process in his newest pottery, where different components of a set take the form of the square, the triangle, and the circle.
Thank you.
Well, one thing that is sometimes overlooked in Japanese invocations of those three symbols, the circle, the square, and the triangle, is that originally they actually originate not in Zen, but in Taoist cosmology in China. And the square represents the earth, the circle represents the heavens, and the triangle represents a human being. So those actually correlate to concrete aspects of the universe, if you want to put it that way. So it kind of encompasses everything, and that's why those three are used together, originating in China. They've been sort of adopted into Zen as well. And of course, the famous ink painter from Fukuoka, the same city as the Takatori kiln and the Kamei family, the famous ink painter Sengai Gibbon, who lived in the early 19th century, did paintings of those three symbols. And so that reflects the adoption of those symbols into Zen philosophy.
That's very helpful.
Mhm.
教授に、この丸三角四角なんですけれども、もともとは禅のあれというよりも、中国の先生術というか、中国の方から来たもので、四角は地球、そして丸は天国、で三角は人間を表すというところから、それからですね、で要するにそれでその宇宙ということになるんですけれども、それから禅の方に受け継がれていったということなんですが、19世紀の福岡の画家の方で仙外も丸三角四角をそういうのを書きになっていますが、それから禅の方に受け継がれていったというのを一つ付け加えておきたいと思います。
Miraku, do you want to comment on how you found a visual representation of these three aspects of Zen?
この禅の丸四角三角というのをどのようにしてその、作品に反映させていらっしゃっていったかということについて少しお話しいただければと思うんですけど。
古くはですね、千利休がわび茶をね、広めたっていうのがありますけども、彼が結局好んでたっていうのが黒ですよね。ブラック。黒の茶碗。でなんで黒の茶碗かっていうと、基本的にいろんな種類の色がありますけども、無駄をどんどん省いて省き込んでいった挙句、最終的にはこの黒にたどり着くっていうことで、利休は黒ということですごくそのブラックを愛したわけですけども、この丸三角四角も、これは精神なんですけども、だんだん丸三角四角こう形を見ていただくとお分かりになりますけども、四角が一番角が多いですよね。次三角で、丸になると角がなくなってきます。でこれは基本的に、人間も徳を積むことによってだんだん角が取れて丸くなっていきますよっていうような教えですね。でこれを作品に還元した時はやっぱりですね、無駄というものを極力今から私は省いていこうと思っています。でこれ、まだね還暦迎えたばっかりですけども、やっとですよ。マスキーさんも同年ですけども、 還暦になって初めてこのわびさびの世界が分かってきたかなっていうような感じです。だからこのわびさびを追求していくにあたって、この丸三角四角、どんどん無駄を削ぎ落としながら、最終的に、とどまるところは15代の無駄のない作品を作っていこうという、一つの表れでもあります。
So, like for example, Senno Rikyu, one of the masters who spread this wabi-cha in the whole world, but he really loved black tea bowl. And then why black for him is that there's several colors, of course, in the world, but when you start eliminating any waste, it goes to reach to black at the final stage. So that's why he loved black chawan. And then if you look at it, for me, it's the circle and square and then triangle. It's a Zen spirit, but it's a same thing. If you look at it, a square, there are 4 corners, and then triangle 3, and then but a circle, there's none. There's none. So that represents the human being also, like as you age, you are going to have like no corners, and then you're going to be a sort of like a circle around spiritually too. So that's what I like to sort of reflect that integrated into my pieces. And then I get 60 years old, and then finally it seems like I started to understand wabi-sabi at the first time in my life. So from now on, like I like to eliminate any sort of waste in my pieces. And finally, I don't know exactly where it will reach, but finally to reach out to the 15th Kamei's original pieces after all those elimination of waste gone, like nothing, and it's going to be simple. It's going to be something, but it's going to be my 15th pieces. That's what I like to create from now
on. It seems to me, Mugi, very radical, if that is the appropriate word, to both embrace tradition and then to add to it and transform it through his own person. My general sense of most of the ceramics we have seen that are from Japan and related to the tea ceremony are an expression of tradition with slight adaptations, but not with the fundamental passion of totally transforming the work through the personality of the creator, of the maker of the ceramics. So I defer to Andrew, clearly, for sure, with this statement. But this seems to me somewhat, if not typical Japanese word, radical.
なんか今お聞きしてると、その言葉として非常になんていうんですかね、ラディカルっていうか、そういうのが浮かんでくるんですけど、今までのお茶道具を作ってらっしゃる方は、やっぱりその伝統を重んじると、伝統を表現する、それからそれを受け入れる、適用するということだったんですけど、なんかこの変異というのは非常にラディカルなものであるというふうに、過激なと言ったらあれなんですけれども、非常にそういう部分が、多く見られるのではないかというふうに、この変化がですね。で、要するに15代の人間としての個人的な変化、変異というのが非常に、ラディカルであるというふうに私には思えるようですということでした。
I think most traditional ceramics makers in Japan look at the boundaries of their tradition and have to figure out how they're going to move forward. And most of them seem to me that they are content to simply push things in a rather small way. Those who go beyond that often go in radical new ways that bear relatively little resemblance to what was made before. And some continue to do both. So you have people in a tradition that made tea wares, making tea bowls on the one hand and going into sculpture on the other. But it's interesting that Miraku-san the 15th has defined his boundaries as essentially materials and a general sense of style that relates to how things have been done since the 17th century, or how the materials that the associated with the style have been used to express that style during that period. But he's taken, I think, a greater step to really consider the possibilities of his materials in a way that kind of transforms the nature of what he's making. In other words, tea utensils. So he hasn't gone into sculpture. He's done, some larger works, as his father did, for exhibition and that sort of thing. But to look at such a basic form as the tea bowl and reimagine it with 2 layers and open work is really something that, in my opinion, goes beyond what most contemporary tea makers, teaware makers are doing. So that's really something that I find compelling about Takatori ware as made by the Kamei family today.
今のところ、その伝統的な陶芸家の伝統を持っているその陶芸家の方たちは、その自分のその境界線というんですか、それをいろんな形で定義されていると思うんですけれども、伝統、ほとんどのを見てみると、その伝統があり、その伝統に基づいて、これからどこに行くかっていうことになると、かなり小さくですね、小さく進んでいくということが多いような気がするんですけども、でそれを超えると、ラディカルというんでしょうか、過激なっていう形容詞が出てくるかと思うんですけども、それ、例えばある人は全く今まで似ても似つかないものをお作りになるとか、彫刻のような陶芸をお作りになるとかいうことが、ある一つ。あとは小さく小さく、少しずつ進んでいくということも、そういうなんか2つの種類に人たちに分かれるような気がするんですけれども、亀井様の場合は自分の境界線というのを伝統的なスタイルと伝統的な材料をもとにして、で例えば高取焼きの要するに茶の湯の道具を作るという高取焼きの中で非常に基本的な例えばお茶碗ということを作りになるときに彫刻の方に行くわけでもなく、それを二重にして例えば二重にして透かしを入れるというような2つのそういう人たちのやり方とは全くかけ離れた要するに茶の湯として機能するものにそういうふうな新しい風を吹き込むというんでしょうか。それが非常に高取焼きの亀井様の珍しいところというのは他の人たちに比べて長いところ、高取焼きの特徴になっているというふうに先生はおっしゃっております。
So first, I just want to apologize to people who thought, as I did, that this would be an hour. It'll probably be an hour and a half. So hopefully no one will leave. but I want to move on to one more piece by Miraku Kamei XV, and then to spend some time looking at the works of his son. I guess we could rationalize it by saying that we spent 60 minutes on the father and 30 minutes on the son. Next image, please.
お父様60分、息子さん30分ということで、すいませんということです。あ、これですね。はい。
So there are a number of pieces in this collection that is new to us that feature or are inspired by Mount Fuji. Carolyn, can you show the next image and we'll go back and forth? Now back to the pot. And there was also, and you can probably find it when Miraku was speaking, the second slide we were going to look at is a tea bowl with Fuji on it. So I'd like to ask Miraku to comment on the creation of this piece or these pieces that pay respect and homage to the single most amazing experience for me whenever we're in Japan, which is being able to see Mount Fuji.
この2つの、富士山の絵が描かれたお茶碗とその富士を表した白いと黒の、作品についてちょっとお話しいただければと思います。
コロナで麦さん皆さんもそうだったと思いますけども、ステイホームっていうのを余儀なくされて何日どのぐらいだった ?2 週間ぐらいだった。2週間ほどとにかく家の敷地内から出れないっていうことが去年おととしかな去年ありましたけども、やっぱりその時に自分の仕事を見つめ直して、自分これからどういう形で作品作りをしていったらいいんだろうって言ったところで、お茶入れ。もうなんかね、日々忙しくしてますと、ゆっくり、こういったお茶入れですよね。お茶入れがなかなか作れないという日常を過ごしてまして、そのステイホームの折にこのお茶入れがすごくゆっくり制作できた時期がございまして、その時にとにかくまずは身近にあるものからとにかくより多くを望まずに身近なものからちょっとやっていこうっていうことで、まずは基本に戻りまして、こういうふうなマスキーさんご存知だと思いますけども、小堀遠州、ちょっとママさん取ってくれるかな。これ、ハンズも入ってる。今、それと右その横の。こういうですね、初期に作られた高取。だから古田織部の指導が入ってたという時代の高取ですよね。で今現在はこういった小堀遠州の指導が入ったお茶入れ、光があるのでね、こういうのを今はメインで作ってたわけですけども、原点に帰ってこの古い高取をちょっとやっていこうということで、いろいろ新しいことでもないんですけど、こういうふうな織部のちょっと風合いを入れたりとかですね、結構ね600個ぐらい作れたんですよ、2週間で。でその中でちょっとさっき言ったその禅のね思想がなんていうのかな、頭の中にパーッと巡りまして、なぜかこの外に出られない自分っていうのも 非常になんかこう、なんかむしゃくしゃしてっていうか、なんか前までは東京に行こうと思えばすぐに行けたんですけど、それも叶わない。うちの敷地内から出られない。でそれになんかね、こう三角の富士山がなんかこうイメージで出てきまして、その三角を作っていく中で、なんかね、非常にこの富士山にすごいなんか思いが寄ってしまって、まあちょっと織部の先ほど言ったこの織部の、造形をこうやって高取と融合できないかなっていうことで、まあちょっとこう作ったお茶碗にこれはなります。で先ほどのやっぱり三角っていうのはもう本当富士山そのものだったんで、その富士山のこの山肌とかをね、どういうふうに表現しようかなっていったところで、まあ表面のギザギザ飛びかんなっぽく表面を処理して富士山っぽく見せた。一つのまあ外に出られないっていう時の外に出たいっていう憧れがすごく入ってます。
Because of the COVID, last year probably like for 2 weeks or longer, we could not even get out of our house or our territory. That we could not go anywhere for 2 weeks, and then more than 2 weeks, and then we started to think about my own work because we can't go anywhere, and started to think that how from now on, how do I start making potteries? And for example, I look at the chaire, which is the tea container, and since I'm so busy usually that I could not even have time to make those, but for those 2 weeks that I had to stay home, I started to make a tea container in sort of like slowly and then with thinking, and I probably made 600 of them that I was able to produce, and it was like sort of the back to basics. And as I showed this old oribe with oribe taste, early Takatori yaki, I decided to go back to our old tradition, the old Takatori ware, and then it's not really a new thing, but I'd really like to go back there to start looking at again. And the Fujisan is when I was thinking about the situation of myself that could not go anywhere. And then somehow it looks like the Mount Fuji came up to my mind. So it's sort of like that's a triangle shape. That's Mount Fuji for me. And then that came into my mind. It's sort of like it's my longings that I'd like to go somewhere, but I could not go anywhere. At that point, Fujisan sort of represent in my mind, the Mount Fuji in my mind was the like longings for freedom, like longings for the outside world. And then of course that the other piece that I see is that I wanted to express Mount Fuji in the small piece with a bumpy surface, because Mount Fuji, actual Mount Fuji is sort of bumpy, and the color with white and black. So that I really wanted to express that, my longings, which is a Mount Fuji, into that piece.
So Carolyn, would you go back to those two other images, and Andrew, would you comment?
富士山への憧れと言いましたけども、実を言うと早くそのコロナが収束して、誰もが外に出れるような日々が早く来ないかなっていうような希望もありましたね。
Also, it's my longings, but at the same time, like I created these pieces like hoping that COVID is going to and then everybody can freely go out without even worry about it. So that's that's the hope that is based on this piece also. It's not just my personal longings, but also the hope for everybody.
Lovely. Andrew?
I would just point out that it's interesting that it was Fuji that came to Mr. Kamei's mind during a period that he couldn't go to Tokyo. If he's going by train to Tokyo, he'll pass right by Fuji. And it was when he was not able to actually go and see Fuji that it kind of inspired him to make these works. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
I love that.
非常に
Like the
面白か
idea
った
of
の
staying
は、
at home.
亀井様が、例えば東京とかにも行けない、すぐに行こうと思えば行けたのに行けなかったっていうことで、富士山っていうのが頭によぎったということなんですけども、それが非常に面白かった。富士山で東京に行かれるときは、富士山を、の横を通って、富士山が見られるわけですから、だからそこのところがとても面白いなというふうに教授は感じている。
日本のある意味シンボルですからね。
This is a symbolic mountain of Japan, Mount Fuji is.
Oh, absolutely. So I just wanted to thank Hisaaki for his patience, and now look at one of his tea bowls and a number of other pieces that he has created, and thank him very much
はい、じゃあ
for,
次、はい、久明さんの方です。はい。
for his willingness to continue the tradition and at the same time to do it on his own terms, as he both creates and continues to learn.
久明さんの方なんですけども、やっぱりこれ、伝統を重んじる、伝統を受け継いでいくっていうところと、ご自分の作品を作るということを、やってらっしゃるんですけども、これからこの久明さんの作品をちょっとお見せして、コメントをいただきたいと思います。
父が言ったように、父には先人に14人いて、僕には先人が15人いるわけで、その人たちの技法だったりとか考えだったりとか、そういうものを、自分に入れ込んでからスタートだっていうことを、祖父も言ってましたし、父もよく言うんですけど、その中で、僕の前には15人いますけど、その人たちがしない技法っていうのも、これから陶芸家としてやっていく中で、必要なことだと思うので、伝統だけにとらわれずに、新しいこともやりたいっていうことで、伝統でできることでまだやったことない、今までの先人でやったことない土に、その鉄を混ぜ込んで土を黒くする、土を黒くすることによって釉薬の発色が変わってくるっていう、そういう今まで先人がやってこなかったような技法を使って、こういう作品を今作っています。
Okay. As my father says, that he has 14 ancestors behind him, and I have 15 ancestors behind me, and of course, my grandfather also, and my father also always says that I have to get all the techniques and their philosophy integrated into myself, and then my pieces. And then, but at the same time, that will be the start. That will be the start of myself. So that all those integration. But at the same time, as a artist, I'd like to do something that our ancestors hadn't done. So I would like to have like new, not just a tradition, but I like to use new technique to create my pieces. So that's one of the technique that I wanted to use here, is that I mixed iron into a clay, so that would make the clay color darker, and then that will change the glaze coloring after we fire the pieces. That's one of the reasons that I made this piece that you're seeing right now.
具合なんですけど、黒くすることによって、鉄を混ぜて黒くすることによって、釉薬の発色が変わってくるんですよ。本来なら、この今、ブルーに見えてますけど、実は高取でいう白い釉薬なんですけど、そういう土に鉄分を混ぜ込むことによって、発色を青に変えているっていう、化学反応で釉薬の発色を変える。使うものは高取の伝統のもので、使う土も高取の土、使う釉薬も高取の釉薬で、今までにない表現方法をしているっていう技法です。
So if you look at this, it looks like blue. So originally I put iron into the traditional clay, the Takatori clay, and then make it darker. And then at the same time, when you use the traditional Takatori glaze, the color, which is a white glaze, that will change the color into this sort of bluish color. So I use traditional materials. I use traditional clay. I use traditional glaze, but the outcome is something different. That's what I'm trying to do here.
Andrew, do you want to speak about this? Then I want to look at the more shaped T-bowl next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to ask maybe on behalf of our potter friends who are watching, I wanted to ask, so this is fired in a reduction, Mugi, that's kangen. It's reduction fired.
これどういうふうに焼いてらっしゃるんでしょうかっていうことなんですけど。
基本的に高取焼きっていうのは酸化で焼くんですけれども、完全に酸化っていうのは窯の性質上不可能なので、弱還元っていう焼き方ですね。
So, I think Professor, like you might want to
translate that.
Translate it better than I do.
Yeah.
So that's not, yeah.
So he said Takatori ware is usually fired in oxidation firing. This one is fired just into the reduction. So not heavy reduction, light reduction. And that obviously with iron mixed in the clay, that creates that dark or black or gray color to the clay and enables that blue to come out. So it's not only a change in the clay, but also a change in the firing environment.
Can we look at the next one, please? There you go. Hisaaki, you want to talk about the notion of form and the chawan and the tea bowl as contrasted with the earlier piece. This fits very comfortably in both of your hands. There's a sense of completion in a way.
これこの前もお話しいただいたんですけど、形状についてちょっとこれについてお話しいただければと思うんですけれども。
これに関してさっき父が言ったように、禅の心でもある丸三角四角を表現していて、これちょっと写しっていう形で400年前に高取焼きで作られていたそういうお茶碗を真似て作ったものなんですけど、下が丸で、胴が四角で口元が三角っていう、形になっていて、その禅の心を作品に取り入れて作った、作品になります。
As my father said that this is the theme of this exhibition is Zen Spirit, which is like circle, triangle, and then square. So this is I sort of based on this piece is like 400 years ago, tea bowl that made in Takatori yaki. So basically the bottom is round and a body is a square, and then opening is triangle. So that Zen Spirit is into this one piece. That's what but it based on the tradition of 400 years.
And Andrew, your thoughts about this particular piece?
Yes, back in the 1980s, early 1980s, there were excavations of the second Takatori kiln, which was active in the early 17th century. And at that time, bowls of this type were, or shards, broken pieces of bowls of this type were discovered in that kiln. Prior to that time, bowls like this had been, historical bowls like this had been attributed to the Karatsu kilns, as I mentioned earlier, more famous than Takatori ware. But those excavations proved that they were actually made by the Takatori potters. So this piece is a very nice rendition of that really important type of tea bowl that was popular in mostly in the 1620s. And in fact, tea bowls of this very type were discovered in Kyoto, also in Sakai. So these were not just popular in Fukuoka, in Kyushu, or that sort of thing. They were popular in Kyoto, where the great tea masters, the great teaware collectors and connoisseurs lived. So it's very fitting that Hisaaki-san has chosen this as a challenge to try to create his own version of, and that's part of the process that potters have to go through as they gain their skills to go and recreate the pieces of the past in their own way and take that experience and move forward to creating the unique things that are special to them.
これ80年代の初めなんですけども、2番目の、窯の発掘があって、その時にこういうピースが出てきたので、要するにこのピースはその唐津とかそういうところだけではなくて、高取もちゃんとこういう作品を作っていたというのがそこで証明されたんですけれども、こういうお茶碗っていうのは1620年代、その九州とかだけではなく、京都、有名な茶人がたくさんいた京都でも非常に人気があったと。で、これを久明さんがこれを、もう一度作り直すっていう自分のやり方で作るっていうことは、陶芸家の方がこう歩まなければならない道というんでしょうか、その昔の技法を手に入れ、それで自分の作品を作っていくっていうのは、陶芸家の方が通らなければならない道だと思うので、これは非常に素晴らしい、これをやり始めたというのは非常に素晴らしいことではないかと思います。
Let's look at the next piece of Mizusashi. There's one more, Carolyn. That's perfect. Just to we began with the Mizusashi of Miraku Kamei 15, and now Mizusashi of Hisaaki. Hisaaki, you want to speak briefly about this? And then there are just a couple of more pieces I want to share, and then thank everyone.
じゃあ、久明さん、こちらの方にもちょっとご説明をいただければと思います。
僕が青を作りたいなと思ったのが、そもそも高取焼きの釉薬、高取焼きの焼き物全体すべてのものが、自然からできていて、作品を作るにあたってそういう、自然を表現したいっていう思いがあって、 やっぱり高取の伝統の7色だと、僕の中では第一にあるものしか表現できないな。まあ、そう思って、まあ、ブルーのものも、まあ、空のものを表現できないかなと思ってブルーを作り始めたんですけど、まあ、その中でこの作品はオーロラをイメージして作りました。なんでしょうまあ、父が富士山に憧れるように僕は日本じゃ絶対に見れないオーロラというものにすごい惹かれて、まあ、そういうものを作品に表現できないかなっていうことでこの作品を手掛け始めたんですけど、まあ、この作品に関してはしのぎっていう技法を使って作ったんですけど、しのぎってこう粘土作った作品を削っていく技法なんですけど、まあ、その技法を用いることによって釉薬に濃淡ができる。深いところには釉薬固まって尖っている場所には釉薬が乗らない、まあ、そういうことが起きることによってより一層高取の釉薬のグラデーションに何でしょうグラデーションが引き立つというか、まあそれでまあこういう作品をオーロラを表現してみました。
So that Takatori yaki, actually the materials are so everything is natural, the clay and then glaze, and then in order for me to I would like to express nature in my pieces, but if it's a traditional Takatori colors, which is 7 colors, I felt that I can only express the nature on the earth, and I'd like to include the nature, include sky and up in the sky into my pieces. So that's why I wanted to have some blue in my pieces. For my father says like Mount Fuji is his sort of longings, but for me it's aurora, which I can't see in Japan, and I really wanted to express that in my piece. So look at this piece. I used the technique called shinogi, which is that you have bumpy surface and then you have this bumpy surface so result in like thickness or thinness of glaze. So some part the glaze get thick and some parts glaze gets thin. So that would so make the gradation is more sort of contrast, the more distinct than like a smooth surface. And then that's what I like to express the sky into my piece.
Mugi, or
Yes.
I would just say what he's trying to express is the aurora borealis, that effect that you see in the sky at the North Pole or at the poles,
Or yeah.
which you can't see in Japan, but he was trying to express the aurora borealis specifically.
Okay.
And the next two pieces continue that use of the aurora glaze in a very simple forms, but at the same time create the opportunity for him to share that experience, if not in person, at least artistically.
これもオーロラの釉薬が使われていて、形はまあ非常にシンプルとはいえ、そのグレー、釉薬のその複雑さが引き立つ、
まあ、右の
作品であると思います。
右のカップに関しては、これは富士山をイメージしてるんですよ。
So on this, the right side, this cup actually, based on the image of Mount Fuji, I created this piece.
青にはやっぱりいろんな表現方法ができるかなと。水も表現できるし、雪なんかも表現できると思うし、まあ、その中で、まあ、富士に雪が積もっている、そういうイメージでこういうカップを作ってみました。
Okay, so this cup is actually based on the image that the Fujisan with a snow on top. So that the blue color actually I can express maybe water, I can express snow, I can express a lot of different things. But this cup is based on the Mount Fuji with the snow.
So I just wanted to skip to the very last slide, Carolyn, if we could. This is the last piece of Hisaaki's we'll be looking at, and then there's one more piece of his father's. Hisaaki, do you want to speak about this particular piece before we go on?
じゃあこの字の方ですね。これについてちょっとお話しいただければと思います。
今回、ゼンスピリットということで、福岡に日本で最初にできた禅のお寺があるんですよ。で、その禅のお寺の133代目の和尚がですね、僕の作品に禅語を書いてあげるよ。せっかく福岡の伝統的な焼き物だから応援してあげるよっていうことで、お茶碗に禅語を書いてくださるということで、お茶碗に禅語を書いていただきました。で、この文字は無事って書かれてるんですね、右から。日本本来の意味では何も起きないことが一番っていう意味がありますけど、禅の意味では心の平穏だったり心の安心だったりとか、そういう意味があります。今回パッカさんのところで扱ってもらうにあたって、世界がコロナでパニックな状態だったので、これが無事に平穏に終わってほしい、無事でいてほしいということで、この作品を出すことにいたしました。
This piece, particularly if you look at the characters, in Fukuoka, there is a first Zen temple in Japan, and the master of this temple is 133 third master of this temple. Actually wanted, he suggested that he could write, he could have this 2 characters for my piece, because my piece, he's trying to sort of support my piece, which is the Fukuoka's, like he's trying to support the Takatori, which is represent Fukuoka pottery. So this is, it's called Buji, it's from the right. The right character is nothingness, and then the second character is the things, so that originally meaning nothing happens. But in the Zen spirit, that represent the peaceness, the peacefulness in your mind, or so I wanted to take this to Mr. Parker's gallery, because it's everything in the whole world is COVID, and my hope of peacefulness in mind, and also like everybody's safety that is included in this piece.
That's a lovely thought, Mugi. Let's look at the last slide, and then let me try to not necessarily talk about this specific piece, but rather to share with you 2 quotes of Brother Thomas. One related to what Hisaaki just said, that consciousness of the beautiful will save the world. And hopefully in his presentation of that specific tea bowl, there is a possibility of saving the world, of making people healthier, making people more conscious of being kind and generous to one another. And the last quote I want to share is basically one of my favorites, and I think, if nothing else, summarizes what the tradition of Takatori is and what your family, Miraku and Hisaaki, have created and continue. What is old and beautiful is always new, and what is beautiful and new is always old.
この作品を最後にあれなんですけれども、この久明さんの願いというのを、その先に込められた願いというのは、トーマス修道士の教えにも つながるものなんですけれども、この、なんていうんですか、一つ、コートが2つあるんですけども、一つには、古くて美しいものはいつも新しい。で、美しくて、新しいものはいつも古いというような引用があるんですが、それにつながるものがあるのではないかというコメントでした。
Well, I'll just say that it's always a pleasure to interact with the Kamei family and also to present and talk a little bit about their works, since that's the ceramic type that first pulled me into studying Japanese ceramics. So it's a pleasure to talk to you today and to share their work.
一つですね、さっき息子が言いましたけども、まあうちのこのミラクガマのポリシーっていうのかな、まあこれも伝統ですけども、使ってる土っていうのが300年前からの土なんですよ。12代がまあその黒田の藩養だった時代に取ってたという土山、そこを手に入れることができて、そこから今原土を取ってきてうちの方で、粘土に生成してずっと使ってます。だから使ってる土がもうずっと14代、13代、12代ずっと一緒です。でこれはまだまあ、孫が今度できまして17代目がいますけども、この代までまだあります。だから彼もこの土を使うことになります。だから土が決まってる。そして伝統的な上薬が決まってる。そして茶の湯で言えばですね、茶の湯の世界で言えばもう寸法の世界って言われるほど結構使うやっぱりほらお茶碗なんかでも使うこういうサイズ感がありますよね。だからその寸法の中でこう作っていかなくちゃいけないっていうのが非常に難しいところで、まあその本当にもう決められた枠の中でいかに自分自身を表現していくかっていうのを、まあ、今後2人とも私もここで終わることなく今後はもっともっと追求していきたいと思いますし、まあ2人でよりまたいい作品を皆様方にお見せできるように精進したいと思いますのでよろしくお願いいたします。
The last comment from Mr. Kamei is that our Miraku Kilns policy, well, it's sort of policy, but we use the same clay for 300 years or so. So we were able to get the place that has for the clay after the feudal lord system is gone, so that we using the same clay from the 12th and the 13th and 14th, and then I'm the 15th, and now we have I have a grandson who is going to be the 17th, and up to his generation we can still use the same clay. So look at it, we have the clay and we have clay was set, and then the glaze are also set. So and then we are using we are making tea ceremony utensils, which means that it's very specifically the dimension is very specified, and we can't really go far beyond it because you have to hold it. Actually, you got to use them. So our framework is very limited. We got lots of rules, but from now on, what we have to do is within those frameworks, within those rules, how freely could we express each one of us, myself, my son, and my grandson, how do we express our own into this very limited a framework and then regulations. So that is the issue that we have from now on. And I am 60 years old, but I cannot stop here. I'm going to prove myself. We're going to move forward with this a very limited framework, and then how freely we can express ourselves from now on. And then I'd like to present better pieces to audiences and then to people in the States also.
So I'm going to not ask Mugi to translate this end part, but simply to say thank you to her for bearing with us, even with COVID. Thank you to Miraku and Hisaaki. And finally, thank you to Andrew. It's been an absolute joy and delight. A slight apology for running well beyond the time we had designated. And the only reason for it is Mugi's slow translation. So I just want to thank everybody for being with us, and the joy of being able to continue to learn as the family continues to experiment within the limitations and restrictions of tradition, which is probably the best way to grow. Thank you all, and good night and good morning.